Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Illinois Policy Unpacked podcast, where we inform the policy conversation in Illinois and beyond. For today's episode, we're joined by Brian Gaines, IGPA's W. Russell Arrington Professor of Political Science at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign. Most of his research focuses on elections, electoral rules, and public opinion. We'll be discussing his most recent published piece with IGPA titled Partisan Division on Ranked Choice Voting. Gaines joins us to explore how support for ranked choice voting has shifted and who's backing or opposing it. It's a timely, thought-provoking discussion you won't want to miss. So sit back, get ready to dive into how this voting method could shape the future of U.S. elections. Brian Gaines, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's start with the basics. Most U.S. elections use a system where voters choose a single candidate, and the one with the highest number of votes wins. How does ranked choice voting work, and what makes it different?
So the first difference is the ballot offers the voters the chance to rank all the candidates competing, as many as they like to. If it's the 2000 presidential election, they're in Florida, they can vote for Al Gore, George W. Bush, and Ralph Nader, and they can rank them in any way they like instead of just picking one. The second difference is then that when the votes are counted, the initial tabulation is done, and if nobody has 50% of the vote, they eliminate the last place candidate and recount by transferring the votes that went to the last place candidate to whoever was marked second as the second choice on those ballots, if there is someone. So ranked choice voting both has the ranking by the voters and then usually a series of counts until somebody gets a majority. And if somebody wins majority in the first round, then the rankings are irrelevant and there's only one count. It looks the same. But if it takes more counts, then you just keep transferring the votes until somebody exceeds 50% and that person wins.
Great. Thank you for highlighting that. What are the most commonly cited benefits and drawbacks of ranked choice voting?
So the advocates will cite all sorts of benefits, and the most obvious one right away is it collects more information. Voters are allowed to say not just who they like best, but they can place them in order. If they don't want to, they don't have to. They can make their ranking just the top candidate, but they can express preferences amongst the whole set. And none of this matters if there are only two candidates, then it's the same system. But if there are more than two candidates, then they can, again, basically provide more information about how they feel about this set of candidates. What else does it do? The advocates will say it increases turnout, which I'm really not sure is true. It decreases negativity in campaigning. It will ultimately decrease polarization. Lots of possible effects, but they're pretty indirect, and there's several steps away from the basics of the system. What do the critics say? One of the things they say is it's complicated, and I'm going to quibble with that as well. I think lots of Americans are used to ranking their favorite movies or ice cream flavors or songs of the best songs of the year. It's nothing inherently complicated about ranking. They say it's confusing, and I think it's a little confusing. It took me, 30 seconds to explain the method. It takes a little longer. There are lots of little details that can vary from city to city or jurisdiction to jurisdiction. Is it just one candidate who's eliminated after there's a count and nobody gets 50%, or is more than one eliminated? So it does take a long time to provide a really thorough description of every detail, but I think in general the idea is not very complicated. But I'm going to say there's one complication that I think is quite surprising for people who've never heard about the system before, and that is that it can cause, it's non-monotonic, that's the jargon for it. Someone who's winning can end up losing because some of the voters rank them more highly. That it doesn't simply turn higher support into a higher probability of winning. That's a genuinely complicated feature. It's not one that comes up that much in public debate because it takes even more time to explain how that occurs. But I think that that's something that some critics, at least in the elite debate, will say is a worrying point. And when you explain it to ordinary voters in, say, focus groups, some of them are bothered by it a lot. There's yet another comeback, which is another complicated one, that it's not clear this happens very much. It's very hard to say how often this happens in official elections.
Gotcha. So it sounds like a pretty complex topic with a lot of pros and cons. Could you explain a little bit more about, you mentioned the reduce negative campaigning. Could you explain that a little bit more?
So once there's a multi-candidate election and everybody is not just trying to be the pick of the voters, but I want to get, if you're not going to rank me most highly, I'd like to be second place, there's some incentive for me then to sort of not to be attacking other candidates. If I think I want the supporters of, my name is Brown, and I want Adams supporters to like me and not like Cole, I don't want to attack Adams too much. If I think I want those people who like Adams a lot to like me second most. And likewise, the Cole supporters were thinking, we're not going to get the Brown supporters, but maybe we can get second place instead of Adams. So to some extent, I think the logic on why the candidates would be a little bit more positive, a little less negative is clear. It's not totally clear in the empirical record that shows up. And you look in jurisdictions where there is ranked choice voting, which, by the way, also goes by a lot of other names. So sometimes it's called instant runoff, and sometimes the single transferable vote. The naming isn't so important, but the system where the voters can rank the candidates. I think the jury is still out on whether it really does produce less negative or more positive campaigns. But I think the logic why it might is sort of obvious, that candidates aren't just trying to be the top choice. They want, if there are voters who don't like me most, I still don't want to be their bottom choice. I would like to be somewhere in the middle, and I want all the voters to like me a little bit, and that means I don't want to take the gloves off and attacking the other candidates who might be the favorite of some subset of these voters.
Absolutely. So less me versus them type of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely complicates the dynamics of the campaigning and the voter's choice. I said it's an advantage that it collects more information, but it also makes it a little bit harder to vote. The voters can choose not to learn more about the candidates, but if there are a lot of candidates, it becomes a bit more onerous to think, I have to rank 8 candidates and I don't know anything about 4 of them. I'm going to have to set aside some more time wherein I could have been watching football, and I'll have to be paying attention to who these people are and whether I like them or not.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining that.
There's a strong movement for it. Their advocates are pushing hard, trying to get more cities to adopt it. I should mention Illinois. So Evanston voted to switch to ranked choice to 2022. Oak Park did in 2024. Skokie has joined them in 2025. But none of those cities are using it yet because there's a Cook County court decision that said it's inconsistent with state law and that ranked choice can't be implemented by a city in Illinois until state election law is changed. That's under appeal, so for the moment, there are 3 cities in Illinois that are on that list of cities that have voted to adopt it, but they haven't used it. None of them has used it yet, and it's pending the appeal. For the moment, it's not possible for them to adopt it, even though they voted because of this court ruling.
Okay, and in Evanston, for example, is that for mayoral races only, or is that ranked for other type of races?
Yeah, I've been a little fast and loose saying it's used in these cities. Some of the cities use it just for mayor, some use it for mayor and council, but not for other offices. As I recall, Evanston, it was for me for mayor and city council, but if this is another of those fine detail points, that if you look at the list of all the places that use it, I said Maine uses it for most offices, not the state legislature. Lots of cities have implemented it for mayor, but not for all the offices, and in some cases it's only mayor. Not many places have implemented ranked choice for every elective office.
Okay, great. Thanks for clarifying that. Your recent publication with IGPA suggests a partisan split with Democrats leaning in favor and Republicans pushing back. Is that trend surprising, or does it reflect broader political dynamics?
I think it's a little surprising. I'll say it's not surprising to see Republicans and Democrats disagreeing. People talk endlessly about an era of polarization when they disagree about everything, and the Republicans look more like each other and less like the Democrats, and vice versa. So one of the ways you see this division is in state legislatures. I mentioned that the referenda in 2024 on ranked choice voting almost all ended up failing. The states where there was a movement to adopt it, it didn't pass. Since then, a number of states have voted to ban it, and that's almost always a Republican-led motion, and so it's almost all states where the Republicans control all of the government. One of the exceptions is Kansas, and there are Democratic governors signed a bill passed in overwhelmingly Republican houses. So there's a little bit of Democratic support. In Mississippi, Democrats joined Republicans in passing a ban. Almost everywhere else, it's a straight party vote. Republicans don't want it. They put a ban in place. Democrats like it. They voted against the ban but failed in the red states, and then blue states don't have bans. Is it surprising? And the roll call separation of Reaps and Dems is not surprising. It's not clear to me that all of these votes are reflecting an objective fact that it's good for Democrats and bad for Republicans. I think the kind of back of the envelope logic on it might be Republicans could like it wherever there's a fairly substantial vote that's kind of on the right, like a libertarian vote, and Democrats maybe would like it more where the minor party that does best is a party more on the left, like the Green Party. And the logic there again is that Greens can then say, I really want to back a Green candidate. He gets my top pick, but then I I have to choose between a Republican and Democrat for second spot, I'll go with the Democrat. Not all of them will, but that'd be more common. Libertarians maybe would be a little more favorable to Republicans. So if you're in the major parties, you might think that your view of whether it's good or bad depends mostly on who's the strong minor party. So far, we don't really see that. We just see Republicans seem to be against it and Democrats for it. And I don't know, again, if that's really because they've studied it closely or it's just kind of separating into herds and donkeys go with donkeys and elephants with elephants.
Gotcha. And in the places that have implemented ranked choice voting, is one party benefiting more than on the other in ranked choice voting?
That's also quite hard to see. Maine has got the longest record at the state level, and Maine's kind of a purple state. And one of the things that shows up, I think, too, is that it turns out it doesn't actually get implemented that often. So you need a lot of candidates. You need more than 2 candidates, or else ranked choice is irrelevant. In the state legislature, they use ranked choice for the primaries, but almost all the primaries in Maine, like almost all the primaries for almost all the state legislatures in the country, don't have very many multi-candidate races. A lot of uncontested races, so a fair number with 2, hardly any with 3 or more. So one of the things about the empirical record is it's pretty sparse. There's probably better records from mayoral elections, but a fair number of those are nonpartisan, so they're a little bit harder to interpret. Is it helping Reaps or Dems? You can't tell if it's just a nonpartisan office. So I don't think it's totally obvious again, and I think the fact that the separation is starting to look pretty clear, the Republicans not liking it, Democrats liking it, could be viewed more as a sort of superstitious learning than that they've looked at the way it plays out and they've concluded that somehow it helps Democrats win office and it hurts Republicans and prevents them from winning office.
Gotcha. So if ranked choice voting is increasingly seen as a democratic reform, why should people outside of party politics care?
Yeah, I think the point I just made, I'm not telling Republicans that they shouldn't like rules that help Republicans or Democrats, they shouldn't help rules that help Democrats. But I think apart from the really intensely partisan, most people like fair elections. It turns out even strong Democrats and strong Republicans don't really like gerrymandering very much. If you show them a map that's designed to give their party extra seats and ask them how it compares to a map that's kind of has simpler districts and is more fair, a lot of the partisans, even the strong partisans, say they like the simple districts. They don't want maps that cheat. I think that on the question, all the questions about electoral rules, should there be an ID requirement? What kind of electoral system should you use? How should you cast your ballot? How should the ballots be cast? It's not true that ordinary people just think, which is best for my party? That's the one I want. So I'm pushing all the time for a more substantive debate about all election rules. What are the pros and cons of ID requirements? What are the pros and cons of remote voting? It's no longer a secret ballot. Is that good or bad? And not immediately just thinking, which party helps? Which party does it hurt? I'll go with my party. And I think that even if elected officials have a stronger incentive to put party first, that an awful lot of the general public, even people who have a clear preference, if they don't have a donkey or elephant tattooed to their chest, they're open to ideas about tweaking election rules, and they're, I think, interested in alternative that are a sharper break, like not just do you need an ID to vote, but are we going to use a different method of voting where you get to rank instead of pick a single candidate. So I think that people who, even with strong party preferences, are thinking about is this a good or a bad idea should be presented with a full debate of pros and cons, a careful debate, and not just if you're from this party, you should like it, if you're this party, you should hate it.
Gotcha. For the publication that you're producing with IGPA, you mentioned that ranked choice voting is not something we have a ton of data on. What data did you use to do this analysis?
In the policy spotlight, I focused mostly on voting, and I talked about the referenda, the 2024 referenda. And in those cases, the pattern is fairly clear that in more democratic areas, the pro-ranked choice side did better, and in less democratic or more Republican areas, the pro-ranked choice side did worse. And that shows up in the states, and it shows up in the cities. So that's a pretty indirect kind of evidence, but it's fairly clear evidence. And then the roll calls I talked about on banning ranked choice, it's very clear the partisan separation is quite dramatic, with a few exceptions. Mississippi is not as clear, and the Democrat who is the governor of Kansas signed the bill. There's other evidence that isn't in my policy spotlight that's I've come across, and I'm working on other papers. And one example of that is campaign donations. So the groups that are behind ranked choice voting, nearly all are advertise themselves as bipartisan and nonpartisan. I took the group Fair Vote, which is one of the prominent groups, and looked at the board members and the people who are on the staff, and looked for each of them in the FEC data on federal campaign donations, which is public information. If your donation is more than $250, it's reported. And disproportionately, the people, insofar as they make donations at all, they make them to the Democratic Party. Not universally, there are some Republicans in the mix, but more of them are giving money to Democrats than are giving money to Republicans. So that's, again, pretty indirect evidence. Who likes ranked choice voting? Who likes it enough to be on the board of an organization that's spending money and promoting it? There are more Democrats than there are Republicans. Does that mean it's a reform that necessarily always helps Democrats? No, I don't think so, but if you're a Republican, you're suspicious, that's probably the sort of red flag that would make you think, I still don't understand how this ranking thing works, but it must be something that just helps them and hurts us. And so I think there's a set of data that are at least indirect evidence that there's a partisan split on it. But that doesn't mean that the partisan split reflects objectively that it's a reform that would only ever help Democrats and hurt Republicans.
Absolutely. Given that ranked choice voting isn't very prevalent in the U.S., it makes sense that voters wouldn't be familiar with it. You touched on this a little bit, but if Illinois were to adopt ranked choice voting, what might that look like in practice?
So it's a very blue state. I've been saying the pattern is that increasingly Democrats seem to like it and Republicans don't. So I think why wouldn't a state like Illinois adopt it then? And there have been bills, but none have gotten anywhere. The easiest answer for me is I don't really know what it would do. I don't think, if I said I think that ranked choice always helps the Democratic Party in Illinois is in pretty good shape. It doesn't necessarily need to tweak electoral rules. You could argue that much of their advantage is already in different electoral rules, that the U.S. House delegation, for example, is heavily Democratic because there's a very skillfully gerrymandered map that exaggerates just how blue the state is. There's some degree of gerrymandering in the state legislative map, too. So maybe the Democratic Party doesn't bother to switch the electoral rule because they've already got their thumbs on the scale in other election rules. But I think the best answer is I don't really know what it would look like. And Illinois did have a very long experiment with a totally different electoral rule. Cumulative voting was used for the Illinois House, not for the Illinois Senate or not for the U.S. House seats. But for about 100 years, Illinois elected the members of the State House using a similarly complicated, interesting rule where people had 3 votes to cast, and they could cast them as 3 votes, all 3 votes to one candidate, or 1.5 to 2 different candidates, or 1 to each of 3 candidates. And it generated lots of data. Political scientists love variation, so we're glad that it was there. It's not clear that it had really dramatic effects because the Senate was using the more traditional just pick one voting. The House and Senate didn't look that different in the end, even with cumulative voting. It could be that ranked choice, were it in place in Illinois after several election cycles, we'd say, it doesn't really do much. It's just less voters, takes longer to fill out your ballot, but apart from that, there's not a sign that it's really shifted politics in a dramatic way. Again, the proponents would say it'll do all kinds of things: higher turnout, less polarization, less negativity, and maybe that would show up. But I'm not certain that I'm persuaded on all those fronts.
Thank you for sharing that. Is there anything else you'd like to share that we haven't mentioned yet?
Well, one of the things I didn't mention that's a potential cost is I think anything that slows down vote tabulation has an inherent risk to it. That the longer it takes for official results, the more, and maybe this is an aspect of polarization, but the more suspicion that something is run afoul, that somebody is doing something illegal, or there's some kind of fraud underway. Whenever there's a change in election rules and election laws, there are usually for a while, there's some glitches in the transition that people have to adjust to a new kind of ballot or voting remotely or whatever. So I think we should expect that places that switch to some version of ranked choice voting, there might be more error made in the first couple of elections. It's more prone to accidentally spoiled ballots or other sorts of errors that make tabulation hard. But I think beyond that, there's some sign that it's just slower. It's inherently harder to do the tabulation. You have to count the votes and you have to do the transfers. You basically process the ballots more times. And I think that that's a legitimate thing to worry about, that the slower the results come out, the more suspicion there is when they're finally released. Maybe in a perfect world this wouldn't be true, and it can be undone to some degree with extremely transparent partial results, an explanation of why the results take a while. But I do worry that in the current culture, slow results just breed conspiracies. People think if we still don't know who won this election, it's a week later, then somehow somebody's cheating. I don't know how they're cheating exactly, but there's some sort of fraud underway here, and they're rigging things, and this is the death of democracy. So I worry quite a bit about the effect on public confidence in the result if it's slow. And so far, ranked choice voting it doesn't have to be extremely slow, but it's kind of slow. New York City, it's Tuesday as we speak now, and it took them about a week to produce the ranked choice results. In this case, it didn't matter. The projection from the first round voting was the eventual winner with 40% was going to clear 50, and people talked as though it wasn't a ranked choice election at all, that it was over, that Cuomo had lost. A week later, we know that that's true, but it wasn't the official result until they finished the ranked choice, and it took a while. So I don't think the proponents should underestimate the cost involved in having a slow tabulation. I think careful tabulation is most important, but we like slow. We like careful and quick, and slow has some very definite bad consequences.
We hope you found today's conversation on ranked choice voting insightful. A big thank you to our guest Brian Gaines for shedding light on how ranked choice voting could impact future Illinois and U.S. elections. Stay tuned for more conversations that inform the policy conversation in Illinois and beyond. Until next time, thanks for listening.